You just don't have the leadership instinct, Trevor. That's what my sister said as she dismissed me from the company our grandfather founded. No raised voice, no argument, just a statement like she was reading a weather report. My name is Trevor Baines. I'm 42 years old. Until 15 minutes ago, I was director of operations at Hartwell Collection, a boutique hotel group with 8 properties across the Midwest. And until this morning, I thought I still mattered here. Megan Baines had been named company president a week ago. Our father, Raymond, had stepped into a ceremonial chairman role citing health and golf. But everyone knew it was Megan's push. She'd returned from a corporate consulting gig in New York with big ideas and a new board in her pocket, 2 ex-McKinsey friends, and 1 investor she charmed during a vision dinner. She stood across the desk from me in her pristine white blouse, arms crossed, her words sharp and practiced. We're restructuring. Your role is being consolidated under a new leadership model. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I nodded once, slowly, and packed up my few desk items. A framed photo of our grandfather in front of our first location in Kansas City. A vintage Hartwell keychain he gave me when I was 14. The only things in the office that meant anything to me. I walked past the open concept workspace I'd helped design last year, past the team I'd hired and trained. No one made eye contact. Some glanced, then quickly looked away. They knew. They'd been briefed. My sister always preferred control over confrontation. I reached the elevator, pressed the button, and exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. When the doors slid closed, I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. What Megan didn't realize, what no one realized, was that years ago, I'd taken my grandfather's advice to heart. Hotels are good business, he'd said when I was 27 and managing my first renovation. But land is the business you build real power on. I took it to heart. Quietly, patiently. Over the last 7 years, I'd worked with our legal team to help negotiate long-term leases for our 3 most profitable properties, St. Louis, Madison, and Kansas City. The land under all 3, privately owned, then by elderly families no longer interested in managing them. Our company didn't have the liquidity to buy them outright at the time, so I did. Through a holding company, TB Management Group. I paid market value, structured long-term leases with preferential renewal terms for Hartwell, and ensured everything was legal, clean, and quietly filed. The company remained the tenant. I became the landlord. I'd never used it against anyone, never needed to, until now. As I pulled out of the parking garage and merged onto Lakeshore Drive, I didn't feel vindictive. I felt surgical. Megan had blindsided me, thinking I'd fade quietly into some mid-tier competitor or latch onto a consulting gig. But the foundation she was standing on wasn't hers. It was mine. And the next renewal cycle? Just 6 months away. I didn't sleep that night. Not out of panic. I just couldn't stop thinking. About the silence in the office as I left. About the way Megan didn't hesitate, not once, when she let me go. She'd waited years for that conversation. She just needed the right title and the right timing. I got up at 5 a.m. anyway, like I always did. Made black coffee, checked emails out of habit. None from Megan. None from the board. Not even a polite, "Thank you for your service." My phone was quiet. That told me everything I needed to know. They'd written me off. Probably thought I'd go quietly, maybe with a few bitter words and some short-lived rumors. They were wrong. By 8:30, I was sitting across from Russell Kane, my real estate attorney. We'd worked together since I bought the land under the Kansas City property. He knew every LLC, every holding company, every clause. More importantly, he knew exactly how to be quiet. "She made her move," I said, sliding the envelope across his desk. Inside was the termination letter, the severance offer, and a few emails I'd quietly forwarded to my personal account over the past year. Russell skimmed the documents, not reacting. "She fired you?" "Restructuring." He nodded. "And the leases?" 6 months left. Then we renegotiate. Russell leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "You want to push?" "No, not yet. I want them to walk into it thinking everything's fine. A small smile touched his lips. And when they ask for renewal terms? We treat them like any other tenant. Market rate. Strict compliance. No favors. Russell nodded again. You want me to notify them about ownership? No. Not until they come to the table. Let them realize it on their own. As I left his office, the early autumn wind cut across Michigan Avenue. I didn't pull my coat tighter. I welcomed the cold. Kept me focused. Megan was brilliant, charismatic, ruthless when it suited her. But she'd never been patient. And she'd never respected what she couldn't see. In her world, leadership meant optics. Influence meant perception. But influence without leverage. That was just theater. What I had was leverage. I spent the rest of the week reviewing lease contracts, noting dates, inspecting compliance clauses. Every property had been maintained, but I found missed inspections, undocumented minor renovations. Small things, but enough to apply pressure later if I needed to. I didn't want to burn anything down. I wanted her to feel the heat, slow and precise. On Friday, I drove to Kansas City. I walked into the hotel lobby under soft gold lighting and the quiet hum of a jazz playlist I'd selected years ago. The general manager, Victor, spotted me immediately. Mr. Baines, I heard what happened. I'm sorry. I shook his hand. No need. You running things smoothly? As best we can. Since Megan took over, we've had a lot more directives from corporate. Cost controls. Vendor shifts. I raised an eyebrow. Quality affected? Victor hesitated. Not yet, but it's not the same. I nodded. Let me know if anything becomes unmanageable. Victor gave me a puzzled look but said nothing. As I stepped out onto the back patio, overlooking the garden I'd personally helped landscape, I thought about what Megan would do when the lease expiration came up. She'd assume it was routine. A line item. A non-issue. That was the difference between us. She built strategy around ambition. I built mine on foundations, and she just stepped into a house I owned. 3 weeks passed before I heard from Megan again. Not a call. Not an apology. Just a group email, sent to former leadership, now unsubtle labeled Legacy Ops. It was a polished update. A new branding initiative, a proposed tech integration, and a note about aligning long-term assets with emerging financial realities. Translation. She was prepping to renegotiate leases. I forwarded the message to Russell with one line. Clock just started. He replied 2 minutes later. She has no idea you're the landlord. Does she? No. And I plan to keep it that way for now. At Hartwell, we always prided ourselves on transparency. At least that's what the brochure said. But in reality, Megan rarely read beyond the executive summaries. The lease agreements were buried 3 folders deep in a server she hadn't opened in years. The renewals weren't flagged with alerts. That was by design. When I took over operations 7 years ago, I built our file architecture with redundancy, not convenience. It was a habit born of watching systems fail from simple overconfidence. Megan never noticed. That week, I started getting messages from people still inside. Quiet check-ins. Neutral tones. But I knew what they were really asking. What's happening? Sarah, our longtime procurement lead, texted late Thursday. They're cutting vendor contracts. We're down to 2 approved linen suppliers. Neither of them deliver on time. Ty from Madison wrote, guest satisfaction scores dropped. We're using cheaper soap dispensers now. Real classy. Every message was a thread, unraveling what we'd built. They weren't complaining. They were alerting me. And Megan? She was too focused on the next press piece. She'd posted a photo on LinkedIn, standing with a celebrity chef in front of our Chicago flagship, captioned, Innovating Tradition, Reinventing Luxury. The comments were glowing. Hundreds of likes. That was her strength. Appearances. Mine was endurance. On Sunday, I had breakfast with my father. He looked older than I remembered. He always did in the quiet hours, before the public smile went on, before he played the charming founder with a firm handshake. I heard, he said, sipping black coffee. She made her move. I nodded. And you let her. She was ready. She was eager. I corrected. He set down the mug. You think I don't know what she's doing? I think you're hoping she figures it out before it breaks. A long pause. She's still your sister, he said finally. And I'm still your son. The silence between us was heavier than it used to be. Then he asked, like a man who already knew the answer, do you still control the land? I looked him in the eye. All 3 properties. He nodded once. Then make sure she doesn't take the whole company down with her. It was the closest thing I'd ever get to permission. That afternoon, I pulled out the original lease agreements and drafted the formal renewal notice. Standard language, nothing aggressive. Market rate adjustment notices. Requirement of updated insurance certificates. Maintenance logs. Compliance inspections. The kind of letter most tenants assume is routine, until they see the numbers. I scheduled delivery for 90 days before expiration. Right on time. Let her open it with confidence. Let her think it's just paperwork. And let her feel the floor shift when she realizes the signature required isn't from a landlord she's never met. It's from her brother. The formal lease renewal letters went out on a Tuesday morning. One to Hartwell's legal department. One to accounting. One to corporate HQ. Attention, Megan Baines, President. No dramatic cover letter. No warning shot. Just standard protocol from TB Management Group, LLC. A name that meant nothing to her. Not yet. By Wednesday afternoon, Russell forwarded me a read receipt. She'd opened the PDF at 2:14 p.m. 3 minutes later, it had been forwarded to legal and finance. No reply, no call, no reaction, which told me everything I needed to know. She still didn't know who TB Management was, and someone in her circle was either too afraid or too unsure to tell her. Perfect. I spent that week doing nothing unusual. No retaliation, no moves, just waiting. But on Friday, I received a call I didn't expect. Trevor. The voice was clipped. Formal. This is Lyle Jacobson from First State Capital. We handle a portion of the Hartwell real estate portfolio. Of course, I said calmly, despite my pulse. I was reviewing some upcoming lease renewals when your name came across. Indirectly. Is there a problem? Well, he paused. More of a curiosity. TB Management Group, does that entity have any relationship with Hartwell's corporate structure? Not officially. I see, he said carefully, because I noticed 3 of our top-performing locations are about to see significant rent increases. Almost triple. That's the current market rate, Lyle. I'm not disputing that, he said quickly. It's just unexpected. I let the silence hang. Will that be an issue for your team? I asked. There was a beat before he replied. That depends on whether the company knew this was coming. They didn't, I said, still calm. But they should have. I could hear him processing the implications, what it would mean for balance sheets, margins, property valuations. When he finally spoke, his voice had shifted. I imagine this is going to be disruptive. That depends, I said, on who's managing the fallout. After we hung up, I leaned back in my chair. My phone buzzed again 5 minutes later. Victor, the Kansas City GM. She just called. He said, "Lo, Megan, asking about property ownership. Wants to know why we don't have renewal terms locked." And what did you say? I said you'd always handled that part of the operations. Good, honest, and neutral. Saturday morning, I received the email. Subject line, lease clarification request. Tone, controlled, curious, nervous beneath the formatting. Hi Trevor, hope you're doing well. I received some documents regarding lease renewals for a few properties. I'm trying to get clarity on ownership structures, specifically TB Management Group. Can we talk? Thanks, Megan. I didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, I forwarded the message to Russell. He called immediately. She's starting to put it together. She's not sure yet. She will be. That's the point. I wanted her to feel it. Not panic. Not humiliation. Something slower. Like doubt seeping into the corners of a plan she thought was flawless. I didn't want her to crash. I wanted her to recalculate, while staring directly at the leverage she'd ignored. That night, I sat on my porch with a glass of bourbon. The sky above Lake Michigan was a steel blue ribbon fading into black. I thought about our grandfather's words, still echoing from a memory I hadn't touched in years. Control isn't about who speaks the loudest. It's about who signs the ground they stand on. And Megan? She was standing on mine. She called Sunday night. Not a text. Not an email. An actual call. 9:47 p.m. No warning. I let it ring twice before answering. Not out of cruelty. Just clarity. "Trevor," she said quickly, skipping greetings. "I need to ask something directly." "Go ahead." "Do you own TB Management Group?" "Yes." Silence. A long, unfiltered silence that told me she hadn't fully prepared for the answer. She must have run through possibilities, outside investors, shell companies, hostile acquisitions. But not this. Not me. "Why didn't you tell me?" I waited a beat. "You didn't ask." "That's not an answer. It's the one you gave me the day you fired me." That landed. I could hear her breathing through the line, steady but shallow. "I wasn't expecting." "You weren't looking," I interrupted. "You never asked who negotiated the land deals. Never read the lease terms. Just approved payments and assumed the ground would hold." "I was running a company." "So was I." She exhaled hard. "Okay," she said, finally quieter. "What do you want?" The question wasn't confrontational. It was real. And I respected that for the first time in a long time. "I don't want to destroy Hartwell," I said. "But I'm not here to subsidize it either. You're increasing the rates. To match the market. Just like any landlord would. You want the brand to evolve? It has to stand on its own feet. You're charging us triple. You're welcome to relocate." That one hung in the air. "These are our anchor properties." "I know." "Then don't pretend this is just business." "I'm not pretending anything," I said. "You were the one who turned family into business. I'm just responding in kind." Her voice dropped to something unfamiliar. Something closer to human. "Dad knew, didn't he?" I didn't answer. "God," she muttered. "He let me fire you knowing you held the ground under 3 flagship locations. Maybe he thought you'd figure it out. And maybe he thought you'd stop me." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Eventually, she sighed. "Can we meet?" "Depends on what kind of meeting you're hoping for." She hesitated. "A real one." I gave her a location. Tuesday morning. Neutral ground. An old cafe near our grandfather's first property. The one he'd built with his hands, not investors. After we hung up, I sat in the dark with that thought circling. She didn't want a war. Not yet. But she was realizing she'd walked into a minefield barefoot. Tuesday came. She was already there when I arrived. Black coffee in front of her. Laptop closed. Phone face down. "You don't look surprised," she said. "You always liked this place." She nodded, glancing around. "Grandpa used to bring us here after site visits." I didn't say anything. Let the memory hang where it belonged. "I'm not going to beg," she said, lifting her eyes to mine. "But I'll be honest, I need options." "Then stop pretending this is temporary." She blinked. "Meaning? You've been treating Hartwell like a growth project." "It's not. It's a foundation. And you don't rebuild a foundation while standing on it." Another pause. "I'm not asking for discounts," she said slowly. "Just time. And predictability." I studied her. The calm in her face was real, but beneath it, I saw what I needed to see. The first crack in her certainty. "I'll give you a counteroffer," I said. "But this time it goes through proper channels. Legal. Binding. No shortcuts." She nodded once, like that concession alone cost her something. "That's fair." The waitress came by and poured coffee into my empty mug without asking. As if she knew we'd been coming here all our lives. Megan looked down, almost sheepish. "Trevor," she said finally, "why didn't you burn the place down?" I stirred my coffee slowly. "Because I helped build it." The proposal came Thursday morning. A clean, formal document. 5 pages. Drafted by Hartwell's legal team. Revised lease terms for all 3 properties. reduced rate increases, a 2-year grace period, and a clause requesting first refusal rights should TB management ever sell. I forwarded it to Russell. 10 minutes later, he called. She's trying to buy breathing room. She's trying to regain control. I corrected. And you? I want to see what she looks like when she plays honest. That night, I made my edits. Nothing extreme. I adjusted the grace period to 1 year. Struck the first refusal clause. Required quarterly maintenance compliance reports. All standard. All neutral. But every change said the same thing. This isn't family anymore. This is business. I sent it back the next morning with a note. Reviewed and amended. Awaiting signature. No smiley face. No warmth. Just the tone she'd chosen first. By Monday, the signed contracts were in my inbox. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. That same afternoon, I got a call from Victor in Kansas City. She's here, he said. Megan. She's walking the property with an architect. Did she say why? Something about streamlining operations and better alignment with brand image. But between us, it looks like she's evaluating what can be sold off. I thanked him and hung up. 15 minutes later, Ty from Madison texted. Rumors of asset divestment. Word is she's trying to pull cash. It made sense. The new lease terms tightened her margins. If she wanted to keep her expansion narrative alive, she needed liquidity. Fast. So I waited. Sure enough, by Wednesday, a name I hadn't seen in years appeared in my inbox. Benjamin Wexler. Commercial real estate broker. Top tier. Discreet. His message was polite. I represent a client seeking preliminary information about your property holdings in Missouri, Wisconsin, and Illinois. Would you be open to a confidential conversation? I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I called Russell. She's fishing, he said after I read him the email. Trying to see if she can buy you out before the board starts asking questions. She can't afford it. Then she's not buying. She's bluffing. We drafted a short reply. Thank you for your inquiry. The properties in question are not currently for sale, nor will they be within the foreseeable future. All current lease agreements remain active. 2 hours later, I got a one-line reply from Wexler. Understood. No follow-up. That same evening, Megan called. I got your message through Wexler. You could have just asked me. I needed to explore. Explore what? A future where we don't depend on you. There it was. Not hostility. Not even disrespect. Just the admission of a loss she couldn't fully accept. That future left the station, I said. Back when you thought control was the same as ownership. She didn't argue. That told me more than anything. You made your point, she said finally. No, I said quietly. I made the foundation visible. She was silent. Then, finally, so what happens now? Now, I said, you run the company, and I own the ground it stands on. As long as you remember that we won't have a problem. Understood. The call ended with no goodbye. And that, somehow, was the most honest moment we'd had in years. By the end of that quarter, the numbers told the story Megan didn't want to. Guest satisfaction scores had dipped 6 points across the board. Maintenance tickets were taking longer to resolve. Vendor fulfillment delays had doubled. And the worst part? The employees weren't complaining anymore. They were quiet, cautious, waiting. I wasn't inside the company anymore. But I didn't need to be. Information has a way of traveling toward silence. Managers I'd trained for years were forwarding me internal memos, CC decks, whispers wrapped in polite language, realignment of guest experience initiatives, temporary streamlining of labor allocations, refocusing procurement standards to meet current realities. Translation: cuts, delays, stress. Hartwell wasn't collapsing, but it was shifting. The kind of shift you only notice if you've spent a decade learning how a building breathes. And I knew this one intimately. I'd been in the walls. Then came the board meeting. Not that I was invited, but on a Thursday evening my father called. She's under pressure, he said without preamble. Numbers don't lie. She blaming the leases? She's trying to. I waited. But the board's not buying it. They've seen the contracts. Clean. Legal. Signed. She should have read them before she signed. He didn't argue. She's asking for help, he said instead. Privately. What kind of help? Capital. Partnership leverage. Maybe even some form of reintegration. The last word was careful, like he wasn't sure if it belonged in the sentence. She wants me back? She won't say that, but she's circling the edge of it. I said nothing. Trevor, he continued. I let her push too far. I wanted her to prove herself. I thought she'd grow into the weight. But some lessons don't wait for growth. They just break. That was the closest thing to an apology I was ever going to get. And it wasn't for me. It was for the company. She thought you'd be an obstacle, he added. She was right, I replied. Just not the kind she expected. That night I sat with the idea reintegration. Not revenge. Not return. Reintegration. Proposal. I didn't want her job. Didn't want the boardroom politics or the public speeches. I didn't want to rewrite history or parade back through the front door like some corporate Lazarus. But I wasn't done either. So I started drafting. It wasn't a pitch. It was a framework. A restructuring of internal operations. A division that would report directly to the board, not to the president. Focused on stability, property efficiency, and long-term reinvestment strategy. Nothing flashy. Nothing marketable. Just solid, foundational work. The same kind I'd been doing all along. By Monday, I sent it through a private channel. Not to Megan. To the board liaison. Accompanied by a 2-sentence note. Hartwell doesn't need new vision. It needs reinforced structure. I can provide that. 2 days passed. Then came the reply. Board has reviewed your proposal. Initial interest confirmed. Megan has been informed. That evening, she called. No small talk. You want a seat at the table again? No. I want to rebuild the table. She didn't laugh. She didn't bristle. She just said, let's talk. And this time, she meant it. We met in the same conference room where she'd fired me 6 months earlier. Same skyline view. Same glass walls. Same thin coffee in thick ceramic mugs. But the dynamic was different. She stood when I walked in. No handshake. Just a nod. Board approved the framework, she said. Conditional on joint oversight. I Saturday joint with you. She hesitated. Joint with whoever they decide has the right experience. I didn't press. The board's message was clear. We don't trust either of you entirely. That was fair. Megan slid a folder across the table. Inside, a clean copy of my proposal, annotated with her notes. Edits, refinements, and in a few places, improvements. She wasn't sabotaging it. She was engaging. I underestimated you, she said, almost clinical. Not just your leverage. Your patience. You could have humiliated me. You didn't. I wasn't interested in revenge. No, I repeated. I was interested in memory. She frowned slightly. What does that mean? It means this company had a soul once. Granddad built it with his hands. Dad scaled it with integrity. Somewhere in between, we turned it into a pitch deck. She sat back. I thought that's what growth looked like. No, I said. That's what detachment looks like. We were quiet for a long time. Then she asked something real. Why didn't you stop me sooner? Because you needed to see the cracks for yourself. And you didn't want to be the villain. Exactly. She tapped a pen against the folder's edge. I was arrogant. You still are. That earned a small smile. But you didn't fold. I added. You stayed. You signed. You adjusted. And you watched. I waited. I corrected. There's a difference. She nodded, the weight of it sinking in. Not shame. Not quite regret. Something quieter, like realizing the damage wasn't total. There's one thing I want in writing, she said. Name it. You stay external. No C-suite. No titles. No press. Done. But full operational authority over your division. Budget autonomy. Reporting lines to the board, not to me. Also done. We signed the agreement at 2:17 p.m. Not dramatic. Not ceremonial. Just ink on paper, witnessed by 2 legal reps and an HR exec who looked surprised we weren't shouting. When we left the room, Megan didn't rush ahead. We walked side by side. At the elevator, she paused. We were never supposed to be enemies, Trevor. No, I agreed. But sometimes families forget what they built until they feel it shift. She pressed the down button. I'm not good at saying this, but thank you for not letting me wreck it completely. You still might, I said. But at least now you'll see it coming. The doors opened. She stepped inside. As they closed, she said quietly, let's rebuild it right this time. The next morning, I showed up to my new office. No nameplate, no assistant, just a corner room with a table, a whiteboard, and a view of the alley behind the building. Perfect. I unpacked one thing. The framed photo of our grandfather, standing in front of the Kansas City property with rolled-up sleeves and dirt under his nails. He wasn't smiling, but he looked solid, like a man who understood that growth wasn't about expansion. It was about roots, and we still had time to dig deeper. I didn't hire a team right away. Could've. The board had approved the budget. But I needed to start from the inside out. No rush, no press release, just work. The first thing I did was visit every property we still owned. Not as a consultant, not as an executive, as a builder. Madison, St. Louis, Kansas City. I walked every hallway, took notes on ductwork and door hinges, asked housekeeping about storage closets and leaky sinks. Not symbolic, practical. People noticed. I wasn't making statements. I was making lists. Victor in Kansas City gave me a long look when I showed up unannounced. You back? Sort of. He smiled. Things feel steadier already. I haven't done anything yet. You showed up. That's more than most. Back in Chicago, I spent long hours in that quiet office. No titles on the door. Just a whiteboard slowly filling with timelines, system audits, and staffing overlaps. I called it the spine. That's what the company lacked now. Everyone wanted the face, the skin, the brand. But nobody wanted to maintain the bones. So I built an internal division designed for that purpose. No fluff, no slogans, just structure. The board approved every step. Megan didn't fight any of it. We met once a week. Short meetings, strict agendas, no lingering. She asked smart questions, stayed focused, didn't posture. The board noticed. So did the staff. Scores started rising again, slowly but visibly. Maintenance delays dropped. Complaints quieted. Some vendors we'd lost began returning under revised agreements. I didn't celebrate. I documented. Because progress without record becomes myth. 2 months in, I finally hired my first staffer. Not a high-flying analyst or some polished Ivy League resume. I brought in Angie, the former operations lead at our Denver property. She'd quit a year earlier after Megan's cost-cutting moves. Quietly competent. Relentlessly practical. Her first question, do we get to fix the things we knew were broken before? Yes, I said. But we'll do it on paper this time. 3 weeks later, she built a tracking dashboard so intuitive even the board started using it. I gave her full autonomy. One morning, Megan stopped by the office. Knocked first. I want to steal Angie, she said, half joking. Too late, I said. She already started fixing our IT redundancies. Megan nodded. We needed this. All of this. She looked around the room, whiteboard full of notes, sticky tabs on the windows, diagrams that made no sense unless you knew where the plumbing went in the Kansas City kitchen wing. You missed the executive floor? She asked. I looked out the window. The view was a brick wall and a fire escape. No, I said. Up there, you forget gravity. Down here, it reminds you what weight feels like. She was quiet for a moment. I was wrong about you, she said softly. No, I replied. You were right about the old me. You just never waited long enough to see what came after. That afternoon, a message came through from our board liaison. Preliminary audit results. New Ops Division shows 12% improvement in turnaround time, 17% drop in deferred maintenance costs, and full compliance on lease standards for the first time in 3 years. Board is impressed. Keep going. I forwarded it to Angie. She replied with one sentence. We're not rebuilding, we're remembering how. The real test came in April. An unexpected city inspection at the Madison property. An electrical fault in a subbasement panel, ignored for 2 years, finally flagged during routine checks. Minor issue, but the report came with a deadline and a fine. Old Hartwell would have scrambled. Sent PR language. Blamed outdated infrastructure. Deferred repairs and hoped for a quieter quarter. We didn't. Angie flagged it in the system. Our new compliance partner scheduled same-day diagnostics. The issue was resolved within 48 hours. Fines waived. Inspector impressed. Megan emailed me the report. Just 3 words. This, actually, works. She didn't need to say more. That was her version of surrender. Or maybe something closer to trust. We never had the dramatic reconciliation moment. No teary confessions or family dinners. Just steady alignment. I built structure. She scaled it. The company, for the first time in years, stopped bleeding and started breathing. The board formalized my position without ceremony. Strategic Operations Lead. No glamour. No press release. Just an org chart update and an email from legal. That was all I needed. The summer came and went quietly. Our numbers leveled. Employee churn slowed. A few of the old staff returned, some under new titles, all with clearer expectations. Victor was promoted to Regional Ops Manager. Sarah rejoined procurement after Megan called her directly to apologize. Yes, apologize. Even Dad said something once, after reading a shareholder update that didn't mention either of our names. Funny, he said over coffee one Sunday. The best work either of you ever did. Doesn't have your faces on it. That's the point, I replied. By fall, we hit stability across all properties. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, predictable, sustainable. Megan visited Kansas City again. No architects this time, no consultants, just her, walking the halls in flats instead of heels, listening instead of directing. I watched from a distance, standing where Grandpa's old tool shed used to be. She noticed me but didn't wave, just nodded. Later that evening, I visited his photo again, the one on my office shelf. The same photo I'd packed 6 months ago with a job I thought I'd lost. Grandpa, sleeves rolled, jaw square, standing in front of the original Hartwell sign. He didn't look triumphant. He looked tired, but grounded, like a man who knew what permanence cost. And that's what this whole thing had always been about. Not punishment, not revenge, not proving anyone wrong, just permanence. The next morning, a small package arrived at my desk. No note. Inside was a brass key polished clean. I recognized it immediately. It was the original key to the Kansas City property. The one Grandpa carried on his belt for decades. I turned it in my hand, letting its weight settle into my palm. No victory speech, no applause, just a single moment of recognition. Sometimes, holding the key doesn't mean you own the door. It means you remember who built it, and that's enough.